What page you got?
Good morning, Shavuot Tov. Welcome to our Parsha class, the Parsha of Shmini. The Parsha begins on page 674. It's the third Parsha of the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, and we're going to talk about the second half of the Parsha. Start with our l'chaim and our coffee. Okay, so far we're starting off with some good energy over here. We have Diane and Michael and Lance here in person with great energy. We have everyone here virtually. Feel the energy through the computer. So we are ready to begin the Parsha of Shemini. So the first half of the Parsha, before we get to the Parsha itself, you know, the second half of the Parsha deals with the laws of kosher, which we've spoken about many times. Today I want to speak about specifically about what seems to be like the most unkosher piece of meat. And what is that? Pork, the pig, the hazir in Hebrew. So we'll talk about what the Torah has to say about the pig, about eating pork, which is that. Oh, okay. Michael's telling us maybe when Mashiach comes, maybe it'll be permitted. We'll have some ham and bacon. We'll have some bacon and eggs. We'll have whatever, right? So we'll see. We'll see what we'll talk about the pig momentarily. But the first half of the parsha, just to kind of continue on the continuation of the parshas over here. The beginning of the book of Leviticus is really a direct continuation to the end of the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus finishes off with the building of the tabernacle, the building of the Mishkan. And we have the directives of how to inaugurate the temple, the Mishkan, and how to anoint the Aaron and his children, the Kohanim. And they finally, at the end of Exodus, they build this Mishkan, and God's presence is felt, is seen. The cloud of glory comes down and surrounds the Mishkan. The beginning of the book of Leviticus, the Parsha of Vayikra, the first Parsha, deals with what Hashem spoke to Moshe from the tent of meeting from the Mishkan. And he tells him many of the laws of the sacrifices, of the animal offerings that were brought in the Mishkan. And that continues in last week's Parsha, the Parsha of Tzav, continuing with those laws. And also, we kind of jump a little bit out of a chronological order. We jump back to the inauguration of the Mishkan, and the way it was that it took 7 days of practice, where every day they would erect the Mishkan, do the service, and then they would take it down for 7 days. Each of the 7 days, which actually was started on the Hebrew calendar just around this time of year, the end of the month of Adar. And then on the first day of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, this was just 2 weeks shy of the first anniversary of the Exodus of Egypt. They erect the Mishkan for real, right? This is the 8th day. On the 8th day, they put up the Mishkan, and it remains up until they travel a few months later. So the beginning of this week's Parsha, the Parsha of Shemini, the word Shemini means the 8th. It's talking about the 8th day of the inauguration. And it goes, the first half of the Parsha talks about the various offerings and services that were done on the first day of the final day of the inauguration, on the 8th day. And finally, the fire came from heaven and consumed all the meat on the altar, which was a sign that, yes, it's working. And working meant that the point, the idea of the Mishkan, which was to bring kapara, to bring atonement for the sin of the golden calf, it is something that was accepted, and the Jewish people were singing and dancing, very happy with these results. The first mitzvah that we have in the Torah, post the story of the inauguration of the Mishkan, the first, what's next chapter? It begins with the laws of kosher. And the laws of kosher, there are many, many laws of kosher. In fact, we one of the things that we study to become a rabbi, to get our certificate of official ordination of being a rabbi, is we focus heavily on the laws of kosher. We spend a full year or year and a half just studying the laws of kosher, right? You think it's so simple. You just, don't mix milk and meat. Don't, right? It's pretty simple, but it's very complex. All the what ifs, what if this happens? What if that happens? Or how to deal with this, how to deal with that. So it's very complex. But the laws of kosher begin with understanding what are kosher, what is kosher. So certain foods are kosher, certain foods are non kosher. So you have different categories of food. You have animals, the signs of a kosher animal and an unkosher animal. You have fish, signs of a kosher fish and an unkosher fish. You have birds, fowl, signs. The Torah actually does not mention signs. The Talmud tells us some signs, but the Torah lists a list of all the non-kosher animals, kosher birds. And then you have generally birds of prey, but I guess more specific than that. And then you have other laws of kosher, which are not necessarily this week's parsha, the idea of not mixing milk and meat and all that. So let's read a little bit about the signs of kosher animals. We're going to jump to page 687. If you have a different chumash, we're on chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 1. God spoke to Moshe and to Aaron to say to them, to speak to the children who will speak to all the Jewish people. Dabru b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people and say, Zois hachaya asher techlu mikol habehema asher alor. These are the living creatures that you may eat from among all the animals on earth. So it gives us two signs. Sign number one is verse 3. Koil mafresas parsa v'sheisas shesa process. You may eat any animal which has a split hoof, which is completely split into two hooves. This, I'm sorry, maligera babehema. It also chews its cud. These are the animals that you may eat. So we have two signs. You have split hooves. With the split hooves, as you see in the diagram on page 689, there could be split hooves that are not completely split, it's only partially split. So split hoof has to be all the way through and through. That's sign number one. Sign number two is chews its cud. It chews its food, right? It eats once. Its digestive system goes in stages, right? It chews, it swallows, right? And then it comes back up, it chews it again, right? So basically, it's continuing to chew its cud multiple times. These animals that have these two signs are kosher. We know what these animals are. There's most or many domesticated animals, farm animals like cow, sheep, goat. Right? All these animals, even the giraffe has these two signs. Another question why we don't eat giraffe meat, but these are the signs for a kosher animal. Technically, giraffes are kosher. Yeah.
Just hard to butcher.
It's a little expensive. Expensive piece of meat. So with the giraffe, it's just parenthetically, there are different myths out there. I'm calling them myths. I heard that it's a myth. That the reason why we don't eat giraffes is because they have such a long neck. We don't know how to slaughter it. I don't think that's true because I think we know how to do it. I think it's just because it's just not the meat is very tough. It's just not an animal that people usually eat. It's just not meat that people usually eat. So it's not just something that, who eats giraffes meat? I don't know. It's very expensive, obviously. Maybe it's just like not. It's not. I think that's what it is. I think in Israel there are these people who try to eat like exotic foods. They find the kosher exotic food. You have like giraffe meat for many. Go to the restaurant, you get giraffe meat. I don't know how much it costs, and I don't know how tasty it is. Okay, let's skip a little bit. We'll get back to this in momentarily. Let's skip to verse 9. Laws of forbidden fish. as zeh toichlu mikol hashabamoyim. This is what you should eat from the creatures of the water. Kol hasheloi snapir v'kaskeses. You may eat the creatures in the water that have fins and scales. Bayamim, bamayim, bayamim, bancholim, whether they live in the seas or in the rivers. These are the fish you may eat. They have fins and scales. By the way, when it says over here scales, not any fish. I'm not a fish expert, so I can't tell you specific fish, which ones have different types of scales, but the kosher scales are types of scales that when you remove them, they remove easily, and none of the skin is removed with the scales. So kosher scales is not any fish that have scales. But if you have fins and you have scales, these types of scales, then it is a kosher fish. Okay. So sharks, not kosher because their scales are one with their skin. Can't remove it without removing the skin. Then you have the laws of forbidden of birds, which the Torah does not actually tell us any sign. But if you look in verse 13, it just says, among birds you shall hold the following in abomination. They must not be eaten. And then it starts listing the different names of birds. So birds is a topic for itself because there's always a question, what are these birds? Because we have the Hebrew names and we have them translated in English, but different traditions, exactly what these birds are. Do we know exactly every bird? So the Talmud goes into greater detail, giving us some signs about birds, but ultimately with birds, we only eat birds that we have a tradition that these are kosher birds. So if there's a new species of bird that is found that we're not sure whether it is part of this tradition, we generally stay away from eating that bird. There's a big question in regards to turkey. When the Jews came to America and they see that people are eating turkey, they weren't sure if it's a kosher bird or not. Some said it is, some said it wasn't. Some perhaps thought it was a chicken, but a big chicken. Either way, it's pretty much accepted today that turkey is kosher. That's why you have turkey all the time in kosher menus. But there are some families that stay away from eating turkey for this exact reason because there is no perhaps there's no tradition that turkey was always kosher because the Torah lists the forbidden birds just by name. So how do we know what exactly these names are, right? We have them in English, but if we look at them in Hebrew, there's different opinions what these birds are. So if we have a tradition that this bird is kosher, so we know that this bird is not from the non-kosher birds. But if it's a new species of bird, we don't know what it is. Perhaps it's one of these birds that the Torah mentions as a non-kosher bird, because there's no tradition. So the Talmud does give us some signs to know birds of prey, and it's like three different signs of. So some say, well, turkey does not fit that bill, so therefore it's a kosher bird. So therefore it's pretty much accepted. But there are some families that still stay away from turkey, just kind of giving you the background based on this parsha. But I want to go back to the two signs of a fish. Yes.
So I would know there is no species that's ever been discovered on Earth.
Oh, we'll get to that in a moment. Yes, yes. Very good point. Very good point. But that's in regards to the animals, not the fish. We'll get to that. You probably heard that from me because I love saying it every time. And you could, yeah, you could. I can't give a Parsha class without mentioning that. It's a powerful idea, but we'll get to that momentarily. So talking about the two signs of the fish and two signs of the animals. So if you go into a marketplace or you find an animal, do you have to look for two signs or perhaps one sign is enough? What happens if someone cut the fish and there's no fins anymore? or you don't see where with it, but all you see was scale. You see a piece of fish that has scales on it. What if you have an animal where it was already slaughtered and all you see is the split hooves? So you may say, what do you mean? The Torah says you need two signs. Maybe it has only one sign. So the Talmud tells us, starting with the fish, the Talmud tells us that any fish that has scales also has fins. There is no fish that has fins and no scales. Either it has no fins or no scales. If it has scales, I mean, this type of scales, the kosher scales, if it has these scales, it's guaranteed it also has fins. In other words, you go to a fish market and you see a fish with scales, you know it's a kosher fish. Because it for sure had fins. Either it was cut or it fell or it had fins. There's no such thing as a fish with scales without fins. So all you really have to look out for is for one side. If it has fins, maybe it had no scales. That's possible. It's possible to have fins without scales. But if it has scales, you know it has fins. That's what the Talmud says about fish. Now, in regards to an animal, the Talmud says something very similar. That if it has split hooves, it also chooses its cut. If it has split hooves, you know it's choose its cut. The hyrax doesn't have split hooves. It chooses it's not fully, not fully. If it has kosher hooves, it also chooses its cut. If it chooses its cut, it doesn't necessarily have split hooves. So if you see that the feet of the animal and you see that it has the kosher split hooves, you know that it is for sure kosher, except for one exception. What's the one exception? The pig. The pig. The pig is the one animal that has complete split hooves, but does not chew its cut. So the Talmud says, if you're able to recognize a pig, and you see that this animal is not a pig, you know it's kosher just by seeing its feet. You see the split hooves, you know for sure it also chooses its cut. In fact, the Talmud learns this out from the verse itself. We read it, and I don't know if you paid attention to it, but it's really interesting the way it is written, as we know, that every word and letter in the Torah is precise, and we learn out many, many ideas and laws from an extra word, or if it's missing a word, or even one letter. So let's go back to verse 3 on page 689, chapter 11, where it introduces the two signs for the kosher animal. You may eat any animal which has split hoof, which is completely split into two hooves. And then it says, what's the second sign? If it chews the cud. Now, in English, every translation is already an interpretation. Literal, to translate this word literally, you have to take out the word if, because in Hebrew, it doesn't have the word if over here. So if you take out the word if, this is how it reads. An animal that has split hoof, which is completely split into two hooves, it chews its cud. That's what it says. Ma'ale gera. It doesn't say it also, or if it also. Or the second sign is chewing its cud. What it says is, an animal that has split hooves, complete split hooves, chews its cud. That's what it says. So the Talmud says that because it doesn't say and it chews its cud, or if it chews its cud, what the Torah is really telling us is that any animal that you see its split hooves, it also chews its cud. There's no such thing as an animal with split hooves that doesn't chew its cud. That's what the Talmud says, deriving it from the fact that it doesn't say an extra word, an extra letter in Hebrew, the vav. It would have added a word vav, and it chews its cud. But it doesn't say and it chews its cud. It says that it chews its cud. It's a fact that if it has split hooves, it also chews its cud. So therefore, you don't have to start, inspecting the way it chews, the way it digests its food. You just see its feet, you know it's a kosher animal. Okay. Now we know that there's one exception. What's that one exception? The pig. So in here, right after verse 3, the Torah gives us 4 exceptions. The first 3, the camel, the hyrax, and the hare, are 3 animals or 3 family species of animals that chew its cud, but don't have split hooves. So the Torah says these 3 animals, even though they chew its cud, but they don't have complete split hoof, they're not kosher. The 4th is all the way in verse 7, is the opposite. That's the pig, right? We can read that inside. Ve'esachazir, and the pig. Ki mafris parsa hu v'sheisa shesa parsa, that has completely split hoofs, but who gate a lo yigar, but does not chew the cud. So therefore, it is impure for you. It's not kosher. So we have 3 that have chew its cud that don't have split hoofs, and 1 that has split hoofs but do not chew its cud. And here's where the idea that Lance brought up comes in. And that's interesting because seemingly when you read the Torah, it's giving you an example. The Torah told us that there are 2 signs for a kosher animal. So let me give you some examples of animals that only have 1 sign. For example, the camel, the hyrax, the hare, the pig. There's only 1 sign, not the other. So be careful. Watch out because they're not kosher. Interestingly, that this was written obviously thousands of years when perhaps people weren't even living on most of the planet. The Jewish people were just coming out of Egypt or living in the desert, and they obviously did not travel the world. And how many species of animals were known to man at the time? We don't know. But from all this time till today, we still have not found any animal aside for these 3 family of animals that only have 1 sign. The pig still remains the only animal that has split hooves and not chew its cud. And the camel and the hyrax and the hare, basically like the rabbits, they're the only animals that chew their cud and don't have split hooves. Till today, even though we have found many more types of animals that were not known to man previously, still remains the same, which is obviously, we know that this is obviously divine coming directly from Hashem. So that's, I think, an amazing idea to think about. But there was a great commentator on the Torah. His name was Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, known for the name of his commentary is the Or HaChaim, the light of Chaim. He wrote a commentary. He was born in the 17th century in Morocco. And later in life, he moved to Israel. Pretty sure he's buried right outside of Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken. His yard site is in the summer, and thousands of people go up to his actually go down, because you have to, like, it's like in Israel, like from the old city, you have to like go down. It's like not far from the city of David, if you've been to the city of David. So that's where he's buried, right at the foot of the Mountain of Olives, the Har Hazeisim. And he wrote a commentary on the Torah, very interesting. And he asks a question on this. He says like this. Verse 3 tells us the rule that if you see 1 sign, split hooves, you know that they chew its cud. Verse 4 to 7 tells us the exceptions to the rule. The pig comes last, 4 verses later. If we're telling you a rule that split hooves, you know for sure it's kosher because it chews its cud, the first exception should be, wait, hold it. But just know that there's 1 animal that there's exception, the pig. That split hooves doesn't chew its cud. Why does the Torah take 3 verses to talk about the other type of animals that chew its cud and don't have split hooves? And only 4 verses later, now, by the way, there's an exception to the rule. I told you in verse 3, you still remember that if you see the hooves, you know that they chew its cud, but there's an exception. Why wait 4 verses? for that exception, right? The Torah seems to be telling me a statement. The statement is, you see an animal that has split hooves, complete split hooves, you know which shoes it's cut, right? That's how we read the verse, right? You know, this is a statement. So why wait for 4 verses to give me the exception? That's the question that the Or HaChaim, the Chaim Ibn Attar, this is the question that he asks. And he says something amazing. You know, Michael kind of said this previously. By the way, you guys can give the class, right? You know, after so many years, I can say, you know, it's like the joke where the people in prison, you know the story with the inmates in prison, where a guy, there's a new inmate. He whatever he was caught, whatever shoplifting, he ends up in prison. So he has a bunch of guys that they waited there for many years, and he's sitting around, and they start throwing out numbers. 75. Everyone bursts out laughing. The other guy says 62. Everyone laughs. You heard this from me before? No.
Keep going.
Everyone laughs. The other guy, 12. Burst out laughing. They're rolling on the floor. He's lost. He says, "What's going on over here?" He says, "Listen, we've been around each other so many years. We all know each other's jokes, and whatever we say, everyone knows already, right? It's like two friends that have been together so long. We all know whatever you know, I know. Whatever I know, you know, right? So how do we have conversation? So we have jokes, but instead of just saying the jokes over and over again, we just number them. So we say 75. We all know the 75 number joke. So we all laugh. It's a funny joke. 12. Oh, it's a funny joke." He says, "Really? Well, let me try it." He says, 93. No one laughs. No one laughs. He says, "Well, what's wrong with 93? He says, "You have to know how to tell a joke." Anyways. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So Michael says like this. Michael touched upon what the Or HaChaim says, and he quotes this medrash, which is actually interesting because we don't really know where this medrash is, but he says it's a medrash. He says that Osid Chazer Litor, that one day when Mashiach comes, the Chazer is the way the Hebrew word for a pig, will become pure, will become kosher. So it's only temporarily non-kosher. One day when Mashiach comes, it will be kosher. What does it mean it will be kosher? Some say it means that it'll start chewing its cud, right? The nature of the animal will change. It'll start chewing its cud. Other people say other explanations. But the idea is it's temporarily non-kosher, but eventually it will become kosher. That's what he said. And therefore, the statement is correct. Meaning the statement is that if it has split hooves, it chews its cud. Because that's really the way it is. Now, temporarily, there's an exception to the rule for now, but because it's not absolute, so therefore the Torah waited for 4 psukim, 4 verses, because the statement is true even without the exception. It's not right now, eventually, but the statement still holds ground because eventually it will become kosher. Which is very interesting, because when we started, I asked the question, what is like the most quintessential non-kosher meat, right? We all said pork. Like in our minds, pork is like the most non-kosher. In fact, the Talmud, it's like so like non-kosher that the Talmud doesn't even use the word chazer, which means a pig. We don't even use that word in the Torah. It's like so like non-kosher. We don't even call it by its name. The Torah, the Talmud uses the word davar acher, which means something else, as you know, to refer to the pig, because it's like so non-kosher. We don't even want to mention its name. It's a davar acher, right? So it's like from all animals that will become kosher, it's specifically this, which is seemingly to be so unkosher. Now, by the way, why is it so unkosher? Why is the chaser, the pig, like wow? I mean, there's so many non-kosher animals, right? Halachically, the piece of pork is not more non-kosher than any other non-kosher meat, right? So, like, why has it become this way? So the various reasons given for this. One of them is historically during the times of the Second Temple, and there was a siege, right? The Romans surrounded Jerusalem for 2.5 years and did not let anyone in and out, including the farmers. So we know that the temple needs many animals for all the animal sacrifices. Every single day there were sheep that were brought as an offering. So they made a deal that every day they would lower on chain, they would lower down money, shkalim, whatever it was, to this company that was providing animals, and they would lift this two animals to a sheep over the wall like this every day. They were able to purchase sheep for their for the offerings, and this went on for many months or maybe years until one day they lowered the money down for the animals, and then instead of bringing sheep, they brought up two pigs. Were lifted up, and it says that the pigs put they stuck their hooves, their feet, their nails into the walls of Jerusalem, and the whole Jerusalem shook. And that was like the beginning of the end. That was like the beginning of the destruction of Jerusalem. So because this story happened with pigs, therefore some say that therefore till today we have this thing that like all non-kosher animals are non-kosher, but the pig is something worse. Like it caused, or the beginning of the, or symbolically the beginning of the destruction of the temple. That's one explanation given. Another explanation given is more what it symbolizes, because we says that the pig likes to roll in mud. Why does it roll in mud? So it tells us because the pig is trying to show off its feet and say, look, you think I'm not kosher? Look at my hooves. Like, I have split hooves, right? I have split hooves, right? So it kind of boasts about something that it doesn't really have. So the idea of boasting and arrogance is represented in the pig, and therefore it's something completely non-kosher. Oh, whatever the reason is, but ultimately we see that this is something that we all accept, and we know that many people who perhaps don't keep strictly kosher home, but pork, I'm not going to eat pork, right? There was someone here recently, a girl that was getting a little more involved in Judaism, and after months, though, many months, maybe a year or two of coming around, she tells us very excitedly that she made a resolution: no more pork. No more pork, right? It's like a big deal, right? Even though she wasn't ready to fully accept a full kosher diet, but it's the right step. And the first thing that came to her mind: what can I take out of my non-kosher diet? Not eating pork was a big step. Was a big deal. So we see that for many people, pork is like, okay, it's not kosher meat, but pork I won't eat. So from all animals, what's the animal that will become kosher one day? Pork. That's the animal that the Orach Chaim says when Mashiach comes will come kosher. In fact, some say that the reason why the name in Hebrew for the pig is Chazir, because Chazir, Chet Zayin Reish, also means Choser, which means to return, to come back. So on let's say becomes religious again. They say Choser b'tshuva. He returned in repentance and tshuva. Choser means to return, to come back. So the Chazir will return. The pig will return and become kosher again. That's some people say why it has its name. But the question is, what is it about the pig? What does the Orach Chaim see? Or he quotes his midrash. Similarly, there's a midrash that tells us that one day it will become kosher from all animals. Why was it the chazir that was chosen? That the camel, that won't become kosher, the horse won't become kosher, or whatever other animal out there, it's never going to be. The rabbit's not going to be kosher, but the pig, that one day will be kosher. Why? So the Rebbe in a footnote to one of his talks, in his edited talks from 1991, he says something fascinating. He takes it out. He says you have to understand the symbolism of these two signs and the symbolism of the pork to understand why the pork will become kosher. And ultimately, it's a message for us, obviously, how we have to live our lives today. What does the pork represent? That's the way you have to look at it. So he says like this: these two signs of a kosher animal, split hooves and chewing its cud, represent two different modes in service of God. Split hooves is our feet. The feet of the animal are kosher. What does the feet represent? Feet represent action, doing something with your feet, walking, right? That's the idea. Good actions, good masim tovim, good deeds, actions, the world of action. Ma'ale chewing your cud, has to do with your mouth, with your digestive system, right? Your internal organs represents the idea of speech. It also represents the idea of emotions, right? Our internal, what's going on internally, thought process. So you have actions, what we actually do, and it's the way we speak and think and feel. That's these two signs of a kosher animal. And ultimately, you need both. You need both. In order to be kosher, you need both. You have to have an emotion to God, to others. You have to speak well, you have to think well, but you also have to do, right? If you have one without the other, it doesn't work, right? Talk about a relationship. Someone says to their spouse, I love you so much. I love you. But then you're sitting around doing nothing all day, right? If you don't act, express that in action, then it doesn't work, right? It's like the story on Valentine's Day where there was a flower shop that said a big sign, say it with flowers. So a person walks in, a husband walks in and says, I want one rose, just one. Says, just one? That's all you want? Says, yeah, I'm a man of few words. So, right? It's like the wife says, if you love me so much, why don't you take out the garbage? Right? Take out the garbage. That's a sign that you love me, right? An action. You have to have action. But the action alone, the dry act, without the emotion, without the feeling behind it, is a little dry, right? So you need both. So you need these two signs to be a kosher animal. You need two signs. But ultimately, which one weighs over? Which one is more important? So the Torah says that ultimately, one or the other action takes precedence. Because ultimately, if you're acting, and acting is also an expression of love, right? Even though it's important to also verbally say it or obviously feel it within it as well. But ultimately, if you're acting out of love, meaning if you're acting, if you're doing, if you're going through the motions of love, that itself is an expression of love, right? Famously, Tanya asks his wife, "Do you love me?" Or what does she reply? How do I love you? I mean, she's listening to everything that I did for you. Of course, I love you, right? Even though they never spoke about love openly, but the mere fact that I'm doing everything for you, that is an expression of my love, right? There's a lot of very profound ideas, by the way, in that movie. Even though the storyline I don't really relate to, or I think it's a very sad storyline, I should say. But the ideas of that, there's many ideas from that movie. We could maybe give a class once just on that profound ideas of that story. But the point is that actions override ultimately. That's the most important. So the Rebbe says the pig from all animals. You know what they have? You know what they have going for them? The split hooves. The split hooves. The emphasis on action. The consistency of action. And even though they lack the chewing the cud, they lack any emotions or thoughts or speech or anything more internal, but they have their action. So now it's not kosher, but you need both. But ultimately, what prevails, ultimately, when Mashiach comes, it will become kosher. Because ultimately, if you and the lesson for us today is that if someone is lacking in emotion and lacking in understanding and knowledge, for whatever reason, as long as we're focusing on action, even if it's a little bit, even if we're unkosher in other ways, we're not the kosher animal yet. In other words, we're living in perhaps what we feel like an unkosher life. Emotionally, I'm not involved in my emotions are not divine, they're not connected to God, they're not perhaps kosher. My thought, my speech, but if my actions are kosher, if I keep my actions good, if I have split hooves, I have kosher, that itself prevails, and that is ultimately you come out on top, and it'll be considered kosher. That's the lesson the Rebbe takes from the idea from the pork, from all animals, the fact that it has kosher hooves. Just to conclude with the story as we are approaching the holiday of Pesach, and I believe I told the story before, so just warning, right? But the story is in
42.
right. I think it's actually like 750, In the 1990s, there was a big issue in Israel at the rabbinate in Israel because thank God the walls of the Iron Curtain of Russia fell down, and there were many Russian immigrants who are moving to Israel. And the question was now, who is Jewish? Because many non-Jewish Russians took the opportunity of leaving Russia, coming to Israel. Many benefits, right? You get whatever, make an aliyah, you get a free apartment, you get schooling, you get whatever, all the money, whatever it is that they would give, all the benefits. So many non-Jewish Russians were coming to Israel as well. So now the rabbin has to figure out who's Jewish, who's not Jewish. It was very difficult. It was doubly as difficult because in Russia, everything was so clandestine. Everything was so, secretive. So there were many people who were born Jewish, but never really had any Jewish identity, never raised Jewish. It wasn't like, oh, I had a bar mitzvah when I was, there was nothing, right? People were so scared of their Judaism. So many parents didn't even tell their children anything about Jewish, maybe just the fact that you're Jewish. So it was so much harder to decide, to figure out who was Jewish, who wasn't Jewish. So they set up a system. One of the systems that they had in place was that if you have two witnesses, two kosher Jewish witnesses who could testify and say, I know this family, I know their parents, I know it, and they are Jewish, they would accept that. Just to kind of make it easier, even if you don't have any documentation. As long as you had two witnesses that were accepted by the Beit Din, they would accept them, the Jewish. So Rabbi Lau, who later became the chief rabbi, he was the rabbi then at in Tel Aviv, chief rabbi of this Tel Aviv, was dealing with a difficult case where there was someone, a young man, comes to Israel, says that he's Jewish, but has nothing. There's no documentation. He knows nothing about Judaism. He can't say the Shema. He doesn't have any identifiable Jewish, thing. And he also can't really put together any witnesses. He says, I don't know. I don't have anyone that knows my family that can tell you whatever. I don't know. They were lost. So they were kind of looking around to see who his parents. He was trying to find who knew his parents in Israel, in Russia, to kind of testify. So finally found one person, actually, a Chabad Chassid, living in Israel, and says, you know what? I actually know that this person is Jewish. I can testify. He came to the Beis Din, and he said, listen, I know that he's Jewish. I'll tell you why. He was living in Moscow. This goes back, whatever, 70s, 80s, 60s, whatever it was. I knew this person's mother. If you would have asked anyone who knew this person's mother, they would say, for sure, not Jewish, communist, nothing to do with Jews. She was a prominent doctor in, I don't know the name of the prominent hospital in Moscow. And she was not living a Jewish life. No one would have known that she's Jewish. So I know she's Jewish. How do I know? Every year, a week or two before Passover, she would come to me. She would come to me with this big container full of cigarettes. And she would say, take these cigarettes, which is very valuable in Russia, and give me matzah. I need matzah for Passover. She would say she was a big smoker. She would smoke a pack a day, 2 packs a day. And she said that every night, before she went to sleep, she would leave one cigarette in the pack, take that cigarette and throw it into a bucket under her bed. Every day. One cigarette a day. And that bucket accumulated, whatever, 350, 365 cigarettes. And that was enough to pay for her matzah. For one mitzvah she would do a year was she would have matzah on Passover. And she would collect the cigarettes the whole year to obtain those matzah. Other than that, you wouldn't have known that she's Jewish. No mezuzah in her house, no Shabbos meals, no sukkah, no Hanukkah, no nothing. Just her matzah that she would collect the whole year. So this rabbi says, I can testify. She was Jewish. This is her son. Shouldn't have a problem. So Rabbi Lau said, some people, they keep Passover 1 day a year, 2 days a year, 7 days a year, 8 days a year, right? To eat no chametz, to eat matzah. But this woman, she kept Passover 365 days a year. Because every day of the year, she was thinking, I need to get my matzah. So I'm going to save up a cigarette so I can buy my matzah when the time comes. So sometimes, perhaps, we don't have both of these signs. We're not a complete righteous person that we can say that our thoughts and our speech and our emotions and our everything is fully in tune with Hashem, with godliness. The main thing is, when we have a choice between the two, action. If our feet, if we're living that type of consistent life, doing a mitzvah consistently, ultimately that prevails and that makes us kosher. So that's the lesson that we could take from the pork, from the pig, which seems to be so treif, so non-kosher, but has the lesson of how you could transform that into becoming the most kosher. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining us. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you, Rabbi. I love that
Absolutely.
cigarette story.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. That's
See
really
you next week.
really wonderful.